Imagine, if you will, standing before a judge who cannot be bribed, cannot be swayed by emotion, and follows a strict, unchangeable code of law. This is not a corrupt magistrate who weighs gold against justice, nor is it a temperamental authority whose verdict shifts with the weather of his mood. This judge operates according to principles so absolute that if you follow the procedure perfectly, if you understand the law and align yourself with its requirements, the verdict must be in your favor. There is no maybe in this courtroom. There is no luck, no chance, no dice rolled in the shadows of uncertainty. There is only law, pure and mathematical, as certain as the sunrise that follows the rotation of the earth. What if I told you that you stand before such a judge every single day of your life, and that this judge is the universe itself? You have been told that success is a matter of chance, that prosperity visits some and ignores others according to the whims of fate. You have been conditioned to hope, to wish, to pray that somehow fortune will smile upon you. You have made affirmations with trembling uncertainty, wondering if this time, perhaps this time, the universe will grant your request. But what if the entire framework of your understanding has been built on a false foundation? What if manifestation is not about hope at all, but about mathematical certainty? There exists a pain that gnaws at the soul of every seeker, the pain of trying everything and still feeling that success is somehow outside your control, that you are a beggar at the gates of abundance rather than an architect of your own reality. This pain comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of the mechanism by which thought becomes form. The promise I extend to you today is not one of optimism or positive thinking in the conventional sense. It is far more powerful than that. The promise is this: once you understand the logic of law as taught by one of the greatest minds ever to explore the junction between spirituality and science, you will never again approach life as a game of chance. You will approach it as an engineer approaches a bridge, as a mathematician approaches an equation, as a judge approaches a legal code. You will know, not hope, not believe, but know that when you set certain causes in motion, certain effects must follow. This is not mysticism. This is mechanics. The masters promised you a secret, and today that secret is delivered not wrapped in vague spiritual language, but in the precise terminology of law and logic. For too long, you have been wandering in the fog of uncertainty, clutching at techniques and affirmations like talismans, hoping they will work, but never quite understanding why they should. That fog lifts today. What replaces it is the cold, clear light of understanding, the kind of understanding that makes doubt impossible because it rests not on faith, but on principle. I ask you now to make a pact with me, a pact that will require you to abandon the comfortable refuge of randomness. For as long as you believe that life is governed by chance, you have an excuse for failure. You can shrug your shoulders and say, "It wasn't meant to be," or "The universe had other plans," and in this way, protect your ego from the responsibility of creation. But if you accept that there is a law, a rigid, unchangeable mathematical law governing the transformation of thought into reality, then you must also accept that your current circumstances are not accidents. They are equations that you yourself have written, whether consciously or unconsciously. This pact demands intellectual courage. It demands that you stop being a victim of forces beyond your control and become a practitioner of forces that have always been within your control. The man who will guide us through this territory is not a guru draped in robes, speaking in riddles and paradoxes. He is Thomas Troward, a British judge who served in the colonial courts of India, a man trained in the rigorous discipline of legal reasoning, a mind that could not accept anything that did not pass the test of logic. Troward stood at the intersection of two worlds: the world of material law, where cause and effect are traced with precision in courtrooms, and the world of mental law, where cause and effect operate with equal precision, but in a realm invisible to the physical eye. What he discovered in that intersection changed the course of New Thought philosophy forever. He became the teacher of teachers, the architect whose blueprints were used by every master who came after him. If you have ever read Wallace Wattles, if you have ever been moved by the systematic approach of the science of getting rich, then you have already encountered Troward's influence, whether you knew it or not. Today, we do not merely discuss techniques for attracting wealth or success. We go deeper. We examine the fundamental operating system of reality itself. We explore why the law must respond to your mental patterns, why it has no choice, why your success, once you understand the mechanism, becomes as inevitable as water flowing downhill. This is not a video for those seeking quick fixes or magical shortcuts. This is for those who want to understand the engineering of consciousness, who want to remove hope from the equation and replace it with certainty. If you are ready for that level of understanding, then stay with me. If you are content with wishing and hoping, then this message is not for you. But if you are ready to stand before the cosmic judge with the confidence of one who knows the law and knows how to wield it, then let us begin. Subscribe now, because what follows is not entertainment. It is education in the highest sense, a revelation of the mathematical certainty of your success. Thomas Troward introduced a concept that revolutionized the understanding of how reality is constructed, and he called it the personal factor. To grasp this concept fully, we must first understand what Troward meant by the universal spirit, or what some might call the universal mind, the infinite intelligence, or simply the one power that underlies all existence. This universal spirit is not a deity with preferences, emotions, or judgments. It is pure, undifferentiated energy. Think of it as the raw electricity flowing through the power grid of existence. Electricity in itself has no shape, no direction, no purpose. It simply is, a vast reservoir of potential waiting to be directed, to be formed, to be given specific expression. This is the nature of the universal spirit, infinite in power, but completely neutral in character. Now, if this universal spirit is like electricity flowing through the cosmic grid, then you, the individual human consciousness, are the transformer. You have encountered transformers on every street corner of your life without perhaps recognizing their profound metaphysical significance. A transformer takes raw electrical current and converts it into a specific form suitable for a specific purpose. The electricity itself doesn't decide what it will power. The transformer makes that determination. In the same way, the universal spirit doesn't decide what form your life will take. You make that determination through the unique configuration of your consciousness. This is the personal factor that Troward identified as the key to all manifestation. You are not separate from the universal power, but you are its specific, individualized point of expression. Understanding this removes one of the greatest obstacles to manifestation: the belief that you must somehow convince or persuade the universe to give you what you desire. You cannot bribe a principle. You cannot negotiate with mathematics. The number 2 does not need to be convinced to add to another 2 to make 4. It simply does so because that is the nature of the principle involved. Similarly, the universal spirit does not need to be convinced to express itself through the pattern you provide. It must do so because that is the nature of the law. The universal is compelled, not by force, but by principle, to take the shape that the personal factor imposes upon it. This is not a mystical belief. It is a logical necessity once you understand the relationship between the universal and the individual. Think of the universal spirit as pure, unformed intelligence, with no bias toward any particular outcome. It is like the artist's clay before the sculptor has touched it, infinitely moldable, but having no form of its own. You are the sculptor. Your thoughts, your habitual mental patterns, your dominant convictions about reality, these are your hands shaping the clay. The clay doesn't resist you. It doesn't judge whether you're making a masterpiece or a monstrosity. It simply takes the form you give it. This is the operation of the personal factor. Whatever pattern you persistently hold in consciousness becomes the mold through which the universal spirit must flow, and, in flowing, must take that exact shape in your physical experience. Troward emphasized that this is not a process that works sometimes, or for some people. It is a process that works always, and for everyone, because it is a law. Laws don't take vacations. They don't play favorites. The law of gravity doesn't suspend itself for the righteous and activate only for the wicked. It operates universally, impersonally, and without exception. The law of mind operates in precisely the same way. Every human being, whether they realize it or not, is using the personal factor every moment of every day. The only difference between those who create lives of abundance and those who create lives of poverty is not that one group has access to the law and the other doesn't. It's that one group understands how to consciously direct the law, while the other group directs it unconsciously and thus haphazardly. Consider what this means for your sense of power in the world. You are not a beggar petitioning an external force for favors. You are an operator at the control panel of infinite energy. The electricity doesn't judge what you plug into it. If you plug in a lamp, you get light. If you plug in a heater, you get warmth. If you plug in a machine, you get mechanical work. The electricity itself is neutral. It simply provides the power for whatever you've chosen to connect to it. Your consciousness is the outlet, and your thoughts are what you're plugging in. If you habitually think thoughts of limitation, scarcity, and impossibility, then the infinite power of the universal spirit flows into that mold and produces limitation, scarcity, and impossibility in your experience. Not because the universe is punishing you, but because the universe is obeying the law. This is why Troward insisted that metaphysics must be understood as a science, not as a religion. Religion often places the power outside of you, in the hands of a capricious deity who must be appeased or pleased. Science places the power in the hands of the practitioner who understands the principle. When Thomas Edison wanted light, he didn't pray for it and hope that God would be generous. He studied the principles of electricity and applied them correctly, and the light came not as a miracle but as a predictable result of correct application of law. Troward was telling us that the same approach applies to the realm of mind and manifestation. There is a principle, there is a law, and when you understand it and apply it correctly, the result must follow. Your success is not in the hands of a generous universe that might grant your wish. It is in your hands as you learn to shape the mold through which infinite power will inevitably express. The personal factor, then, is both your greatest responsibility and your greatest power. It is your responsibility because you cannot escape it. You are shaping your reality every moment, whether you're aware of it or not. But it is your greatest power, because once you become conscious of it, once you understand that you are the transformer determining what form infinite energy will take in your life, you can deliberately choose the pattern. You can consciously design the mold. You can stop being a victim of your unconscious mental habits and become an architect of your destiny. This is not about changing the universe. The universe doesn't need to change. It's about changing the pattern you're presenting to the universe, knowing with mathematical certainty that the universe must reflect that pattern back to you in the form of your experience. Troward observed that most people live their entire lives without ever recognizing this relationship between the universal and the personal. They see themselves as separate from the creative power, as subjects waiting for the king to bestow gifts, as children hoping that father will be in a good mood today. This misunderstanding is the root of all suffering and limitation. The moment you grasp that you are not separate from the power but are its individualized expression, that you are not a receiver of power but a director of power, everything changes. The beggar at the gate realizes he was standing at the gate of his own mansion all along. The prisoner discovers that the key to the cell was in his pocket the entire time. The victim understands that he has been writing the script of his life from the beginning, though he was writing it unconsciously, and that he can now take conscious control of the pen. This brings us to a profound realization. The universal spirit has no agenda of its own. It is not trying to teach you lessons through hardship. It is not testing your worthiness through suffering. It is not withholding abundance until you prove yourself deserving. These are all human projections onto a principle that is no more personal than the principle of mathematics. The universal spirit is infinite possibility waiting for direction, and the personal factor, your individual consciousness, provides that direction. Whatever direction you provide, the universal spirit must follow, because that is the law of its nature. This is simultaneously humbling and empowering. Humbling because you can no longer blame external circumstances for your condition, and empowering because you can no longer be victimized by external circumstances once you understand your role as the director of universal power. Troward used the analogy of the gardener and the seed to illustrate this relationship. The gardener doesn't create the life force within the seed. That life force is already there, provided by nature itself, by the universal creative power. But the gardener does provide the conditions under which that life force will express. If the gardener plants a tomato seed, he will get tomatoes not because he created the tomato-making power, but because he directed where and how that universal life force would express. The seed contains the pattern, the universal life force contains the energy, and the result is inevitable when the conditions are right. Your dominant thought is the seed, the universal spirit is the life force, and your experience is the inevitable harvest. You are not creating the power. You could never create infinite power, but you are directing it, channeling it, giving it the specific form it will take in your life. This understanding eliminates the confusion between effort and force. Many people try to manifest through forced effort, through manipulation, through pushing and striving and exhausting themselves in an attempt to make things happen. This is like trying to force a seed to grow by pulling on the sprout. The seed has its own intelligence, its own pattern of unfoldment, and your job is not to force it, but to provide the right conditions and then trust the law of growth. Similarly, when you've established a mental pattern, when you've impressed your desire upon the universal mind through the personal factor, your job is not to force the manifestation through anxious effort, but to maintain the mental pattern and trust the law to produce the corresponding result. The law doesn't need your help to operate. It needs your consistency in providing the pattern. Consider the implications of this for how you approach your desires. If you want wealth, you don't need to figure out all the ways wealth could come to you. That's trying to do the universe's job. Your job is to establish the mental equivalent of wealth, the consciousness of abundance, the habitual thought patterns of prosperity, and hold that pattern with unwavering consistency. The universal spirit, flowing through the mold of your consciousness, must then produce wealth in your experience, and it will find ways to do so that your limited human intellect could never have conceived. The how is not your department. The what is your department. You choose what pattern to hold. The universal spirit handles how that pattern manifests in form. Troward was adamant that this is not wishful thinking or positive affirmation without foundation. It is recognition of a cosmic principle. When you truly understand that the universal spirit has no choice but to take the form of your habitual thought, you stop hoping and start knowing. Hope implies uncertainty. You hope something might happen. Knowledge implies certainty. You know something must happen. This shift from hope to knowledge is the shift from amateur to master, from someone playing with the law to someone wielding the law with precision. The personal factor is your point of power, the place where infinite potential meets individual direction. Learn to consciously control this factor, and you've learned to consciously control your entire experience of reality. To deepen our understanding of how this mechanism operates, Troward offered another analogy that makes the impersonal nature of the law crystal clear, the analogy of water flowing through a pipe. Water, in its natural state, has no inherent shape. Pour it into a glass and it becomes cylindrical or rectangular, conforming perfectly to the interior dimensions of the container. Pour it into a vase and it takes an entirely different shape. The water itself doesn't decide what shape to take. The container decides that. The water simply fills whatever vessel it's poured into, taking on that vessel's exact form. This is the perfect metaphor for understanding how the universal spirit responds to the personal factor of your consciousness. Your mind is the pipe, the infinite creative energy of the universe is the water, and your life experience is the shape the water takes as it flows through the unique configuration of your mental pipe. Now, let's extend this analogy to its logical conclusion. If your mental pipe, your habitual patterns of thought, your deep convictions about what is possible and impossible, your unconscious beliefs about your own worthiness and capability, if this pipe is shaped by poverty consciousness, then the infinite abundance of the universe must take the shape of poverty as it flows through your consciousness into your experience. This is not because the universe is cruel or because you're being punished for some cosmic transgression. It is simply because the law is operating exactly as it always operates, impersonally, universally, and without exception. The water doesn't judge the pipe. It doesn't say, This pipe is bad. I refuse to flow through it. It flows regardless, taking whatever shape the pipe provides. This is perhaps the most challenging truth for the human ego to accept. You are not a victim of circumstances. You are the creator of circumstances through the shape of your consciousness. When your life is filled with lack, it's not because the universe is withholding abundance from you. The universe has no capacity to withhold anything. It is infinite, inexhaustible, and infinitely generous in its nature, but it can only give you what you have the mental equivalent to receive. If your consciousness is shaped by the belief that money is scarce, that opportunities are limited, that success is for other people but not for you, then the infinite creative power flowing through you must create scarcity, limited opportunities, and failure. Not because that's what the universe wants for you, but because that's the mold you've provided. Troward explained this by pointing out that the universal mind is subjective to the individual mind. This is a technical term that carries profound implications. When we say something is subjective to something else, we mean it takes orders from it. It molds itself according to it. The universal mind, despite being infinite and all-powerful, is subjective to your individual mind in the sense that it must take the shape you give it. It has no agenda of its own regarding what your life should look like. It is pure creative power awaiting your direction, and whatever direction you give it, consciously or unconsciously, constructively or destructively, it must follow. This is the law. This is the iron logic that Troward, with his legal mind, extracted from the nature of consciousness itself. Think about what this means for the concept of blame and victimhood. As long as you believe that your circumstances are imposed upon you from outside, by the economy, by other people, by fate, by bad luck, you remain powerless. You are a leaf blown by winds you cannot control. But the moment you understand that your circumstances are shaped from inside, by the configuration of your own consciousness, you reclaim your power. You are no longer a leaf in the wind. You are the wind itself. This doesn't mean that external events don't occur. It means that your experience of those events, and indeed your role in creating the conditions that attract those events, is determined by the mental pipe through which universal creative power is flowing in your individual life. Consider a concrete example. Two people face the same economic recession. One has a consciousness shaped by fear, by belief in limitation, by conviction that scarcity is the fundamental nature of reality. As the universal creative power flows through this consciousness, it must create experiences that confirm these beliefs. Job loss, financial struggle, mounting anxiety. The other person has a consciousness shaped by understanding of abundance, by faith in infinite supply, by conviction that opportunity is always present for those who can perceive it. As the same universal creative power flows through this consciousness, it must create experiences that confirm these beliefs. Unexpected opportunities, creative solutions, paths to prosperity that seem to open out of nowhere. The external circumstance was the same. The internal consciousness was different, and therefore the experienced reality was different. This is not to say that consciousness change is easy, or that awareness of this principle automatically transforms your life overnight. The pipe has been shaped by years, perhaps decades of unconscious conditioning. Your beliefs about money, success, relationships, and your own worth were installed in your consciousness largely before you had any choice in the matter, by parents, by culture, by early experiences that formed neural patterns in your brain. These patterns are the current shape of your pipe, and the universal spirit is flowing through them right now, creating your current experience. But here is the liberating truth that Troward emphasized. While you may not have chosen the original shape of your pipe, you can reshape it. Through conscious, persistent, intelligent use of your mind, you can reconfigure the mold, and as the mold changes, the flow must change, and as the flow changes, your experience must change. The water has no choice but to take the shape of the pipe. This is the mechanical aspect of the law that makes it reliable. You cannot have a pipe shaped like a triangle and expect the water to come out shaped like a circle. The form of the effect must match the form of the cause. If your consciousness is the cause and your life experience is the effect, then the only way to change the effect is to change the cause. No amount of manipulation of external circumstances will produce lasting change if the internal consciousness remains the same, because the consciousness will simply reproduce the same circumstances in a different guise. This is why lottery winners often end up broke again. The external circumstance changed temporarily, but the consciousness that created poverty remained unchanged, and so it reasserted itself and recreated poverty despite the temporary influx of money. Troward's water analogy also helps us understand why affirmations and visualizations sometimes seem to fail. If you are affirming abundance while your deeper consciousness is shaped by poverty, you are trying to pour water through a poverty-shaped pipe while hoping for an abundance-shaped result. It cannot work, not because affirmations are ineffective, but because you're working against the actual shape of your consciousness. The affirmation sits on the surface of your mind like oil on water, while the deep channels of your thought remain configured for lack. True transformation requires going deeper, to the level where the pipe itself is shaped, where your fundamental assumptions about reality and your place in it reside. This is the level at which the personal factor actually operates, and this is the level at which you must work if you want real, lasting change. The impersonal nature of this law is both sobering and liberating. It's sobering because you cannot cheat it, cannot manipulate it, cannot pray your way around it. The pipe is the pipe, and the water will take its shape, regardless of your wishes or your worthiness or your history. But it's liberating because the law plays no favorites. It doesn't matter what your past has been, what mistakes you've made, what failures you've experienced. The moment you change the shape of the pipe, the moment you reconfigure your consciousness, the water must take the new shape. The law doesn't remember your past failures. It only responds to your present mental state. In this sense, you always have a fresh start available to you. Every moment is an opportunity to reshape the pipe, and every reshaping will produce corresponding changes in your experience. Troward insisted that understanding this mechanism removes the need for faith in the traditional religious sense. You don't need to have faith that water will conform to the shape of a pipe. You know it will, because that's the nature of water and the nature of pipes. Similarly, once you understand that the universal spirit must conform to the shape of your consciousness, you don't need faith that it will work. You know it will work, because that's the nature of consciousness and the nature of the creative law. This knowing is far more powerful than believing or hoping. Knowing is what produces the calm certainty of the master, who works with the law as an engineer, works with physical principles, not hoping the bridge will stand, but knowing it will stand because the calculations have been done correctly and the principles have been applied accurately. The question then becomes, how do you reshape the pipe? How do you reconfigure consciousness that has been shaped by decades of conditioning? Troward's answer was clear: through the persistent, intelligent, emotional investment in a new pattern of thought. You must saturate your mind with the mental equivalent of what you desire, until that mental equivalent becomes the habitual shape of your consciousness. This is not done through occasional positive thinking or sporadic affirmations. It's done through dedicated mental practice, through choosing your thoughts as carefully as a sculptor chooses each stroke of the chisel, through refusing to allow the old poverty-shaped patterns to run unchallenged in your mind. Day by day, thought by thought, you reshape the pipe, and as you do, the water begins to take a new shape, and your life begins to reflect that new shape back to you. This is why Troward emphasized that manifestation is not a miracle, it's a method. It's not supernatural. It's natural law operating at a level most people don't perceive. The water taking the shape of the pipe is not a miracle, it's physics. Your life taking the shape of your consciousness is not a miracle, it's mental physics, the law of mind operating with the same reliability and impersonality as physical law. Once you see this, once you truly grasp that you are living in a universe of law rather than a universe of chaos, everything changes. You stop being a victim and become an operator. You stop begging and start building. You stop hoping and start knowing. And in that knowing, in that certainty grounded in understanding of principle, lies the mathematical guarantee of your success. If you have encountered the work of Wallace D. Wattles, particularly his masterwork, The Science of Getting Rich, then you have already experienced the intellectual descendants of Thomas Troward's teaching, though you may not have known it. Wattles, writing in the early 20th century, created what many consider to be the most practical, systematic, and logically coherent manual for wealth creation ever written. His approach was scientific in nature. He presented principles as facts, not as hopes or beliefs, and he laid out a step-by-step method for applying those principles to produce predictable results. But where did Wattles get this scientific framework? Where did he learn to speak of manifestation not as mysticism, but as mechanics? The answer is Thomas Troward. Troward was the architect who drew the blueprints. Wattles was the contractor who built the house according to those blueprints. To truly understand the foundation of New Thought prosperity teaching, you must understand Troward's logic. Wattles tells you what to do. Think in a certain way, form a clear mental image, hold unwavering faith, act with purpose in the present. These are the instructions, the practical steps, and they work when followed correctly. But Troward explains why these steps work, and in that explanation lies the difference between following a recipe and understanding chemistry. When you follow a recipe, you can bake a cake, but if something goes wrong, you don't know how to fix it because you don't understand the underlying principles. When you understand chemistry, you know why flour and eggs and heat combine to produce a particular result, and therefore you can troubleshoot, adjust, and innovate. Troward gave the New Thought movement its chemistry, the deep principles that explain why mental images become physical facts, why faith is not a theological virtue but a psychological necessity, why action taken from a certain mental state produces different results than action taken from a different mental state. The lineage from Troward to Wattles to the modern manifestation teachers is direct and traceable. Troward published his Edinburgh Lectures on Mental Science in 1904, and these lectures became the textbook for serious students of mental law. Wattles, writing just a few years later, incorporated Troward's principles almost verbatim in some passages of his work, though he translated them from the philosophical into the practical. Where Troward would discuss the subjective nature of the universal mind, Wattles would translate that into the instruction to hold the unwavering vision. Where Troward would explain the relationship between thought and substance, Wattles would translate that into the principle that there is a thinking stuff from which all things are made. The core logic remains identical. Only the language shifts from the academic to the accessible. What Troward provided was something that had been missing from most spiritual and metaphysical teaching up to that point: logical rigor. Religion had taught that God grants favors to the faithful, but remained mysterious about the mechanism. Folk magic and occultism had taught various techniques for influencing reality, but wrapped them in symbolic language that obscured rather than clarified the principles involved. Troward, with his legal mind trained to trace cause and effect with precision, cut through all of that and said, there is a law. The law operates through consciousness. Consciousness is the mediator between the infinite and the finite, and anyone who understands how consciousness works can work with the law to produce specific, desired results. This was revolutionary, not because it was new, mystics had intuited these truths for centuries, but because it was stated with the clarity and logical force of a legal argument. When you understand this intellectual heritage, you begin to see why the New Thought movement has been so persistently effective for those who apply it correctly. It's not based on wishful thinking or positive attitude divorced from principle. It's based on a coherent theory of how consciousness interacts with the creative power of the universe, and that theory has been tested and validated by thousands of practitioners over more than a century. The reason The Science of Getting Rich still changes lives today, more than 100 years after it was written, is because it's based on principles, not on trends. And those principles came from Troward's meticulous analysis of the relationship between mind and reality. Consider what this means for your own practice of manifestation. If you have been treating it as a kind of hopeful experiment, trying various techniques, sometimes succeeding and sometimes failing, never quite sure why one approach works while another doesn't, then you have been working without understanding the foundation. It's like trying to build a house without understanding that the foundation must be solid, that the walls must be load-bearing, that the roof must shed water. You might get lucky and end up with something habitable, but more likely you'll end up with a structure that collapses at the first storm. When you study Troward and understand the logical foundation beneath the techniques, you stop experimenting and start engineering. You know why certain approaches work, and therefore you can apply them with confidence and consistency. Troward's influence extended beyond Wattles to nearly every major figure in the New Thought and New Age movements. When you read Neville Goddard speaking of consciousness as the only reality, you are hearing echoes of Troward. When you encounter Abraham Hicks teaching about vibrational alignment, the underlying principle is Troward's concept of mental equivalence and the subjective nature of universal mind. When you study Joseph Murphy's discussion of the subconscious mind as the channel for infinite intelligence, you are encountering Troward's personal factor, expressed in different terminology. The language has evolved, the presentation has been adapted for different audiences and different eras, but the core logical framework remains Troward's gift to all who came after him. What distinguished Troward from other spiritual teachers of his era was his insistence that metaphysics must be as rigorous as mathematics. He would not accept vague statements or contradictory principles. If something was true, it must be true always and everywhere, and its truth must be demonstrable through logical argument and practical application. This is the standard of a judge, someone trained to examine claims, to test evidence, to arrive at conclusions that can withstand scrutiny. When Troward stated that the universal mind is subjective to the individual mind, he didn't ask you to take it on faith. He built a logical argument showing why this must be the case based on the nature of consciousness itself. When he explained that thought is creative, he didn't point to mystical traditions or ancient texts. He reasoned from first principles about the relationship between the invisible and the visible, the mental and the material. This logical approach is precisely what was needed to rescue manifestation teaching from the realm of superstition and place it on solid ground. Before Troward, people might perform rituals or recite prayers and hope for results, attributing success to divine favor and failure to divine punishment or their own unworthiness. After Troward, practitioners could understand that results follow from correct application of mental law, and failure results from misunderstanding or misapplication of that law, not from unworthiness or divine caprice. This shift from religious framework to scientific framework was liberating for thousands of people who had been trapped in guilt and confusion, never knowing why their spiritual practices sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. The relationship between Troward and Wattles specifically deserves deeper examination because it illustrates how profound philosophical insight translates into practical methodology. Troward was the philosopher, content to explain principles and leave application largely to his readers. Wattles was the pragmatist, obsessed with making these principles accessible and actionable for the average person who wanted to escape poverty and build wealth. In The Science of Getting Rich, Wattles takes Troward's explanation of how consciousness shapes reality and converts it into a step-by-step method. Form the mental image, hold it with faith, give thanks in advance, act in the present. Each step corresponds to an aspect of Troward's teaching. The mental image corresponds to the personal factor, providing the mold. Faith corresponds to recognizing the subjective nature of universal mind and its inevitable response. Gratitude corresponds to establishing the mental equivalent of abundance, and action corresponds to the principle that thought must be expressed in form through the physical plane. When you understand this connection, you can see that Wattles was not inventing a new system. He was translating Troward's system into instructions that a factory worker or a shopkeeper could follow. This is why The Science of Getting Rich is so effective. It's not one man's opinion about how to get rich. It's a practical manual based on sound principles of mental law, as articulated by one of the clearest minds ever to examine those laws. When you follow Wattles' method, you are not following a self-help guru. You are applying principles that have the same validity as the principles of engineering or chemistry, principles that were extracted from the nature of reality itself by a man who knew how to think. The lineage continues to this day. Every modern teacher of manifestation, whether they acknowledge it or not, stands on Troward's shoulders. The language has changed. We speak now of quantum fields and vibrational frequencies and neural plasticity, but the core insight remains. Consciousness is the mediator between infinite potential and finite form, and by learning to consciously direct consciousness, you learn to consciously create your experience. This is Troward's legacy. He gave us the logic of law. He showed us that we are not supplicants before an arbitrary power, but operators of a responsive system. He removed the mystery and revealed the mechanics. And in doing so, he made it possible for anyone willing to study and apply the principles to achieve results that previous generations could only pray for. Understanding this heritage empowers you in two ways. First, it gives you confidence that you are not following some newfangled trend or New Age fantasy, but rather a coherent system of thought that has been tested and refined over more than a century. Second, it encourages you to go to the source, to study Troward directly, to encounter the logical framework in its purest form before it has been diluted or distorted by popularizers. When you read Troward, you may find the language more formal, the arguments more abstract than the accessible style of Wattles or modern teachers. But in that formality and abstraction, you will find clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when a powerful intellect is focused without compromise on discovering and articulating truth. And that clarity is what transforms hope into certainty, belief into knowledge, and desire into manifestation. Now we come to what may be the single most important benefit of understanding the logical foundation that Troward provides: the removal of doubt. Doubt is not merely an inconvenience in the manifestation process, it is the primary saboteur, the assassin that kills your desires before they can reach full form. Why is doubt so destructive? Because the law of mind operates through the pattern held in consciousness, and doubt creates a contradictory pattern. It's like trying to pour water through a pipe that keeps changing shape. The water cannot take a stable form if the mold is constantly shifting. When you hold the mental image of your desire, while simultaneously doubting whether it will manifest, you are giving the universal mind contradictory instructions. The result is confusion, delay, and often complete failure of manifestation, not because the law stopped working, but because you gave it conflicting information about what form to take. Where does doubt come from? At its root, doubt comes from the belief that success is random rather than lawful. If you believe that manifestation is a matter of luck or divine favor, then you have every reason to doubt whether your particular desire will be granted. Will God be generous today? Will the universe smile upon me? Will I be one of the lucky ones? These questions are born from fundamental misunderstanding of the mechanism involved. But when you understand, as Troward explains with irrefutable logic, that the universal spirit must take the form of your habitual thought, that it has no choice because that is its nature, then doubt becomes illogical. Doubt makes sense only if you think you're trying to influence an external capricious power. Doubt makes no sense when you understand that you are directing a lawful, impersonal, creative process. Consider the analogy of the engineer designing a bridge. When an engineer calculates the load-bearing capacity of steel beams, when she computes the stress distribution across the structure, when she verifies that every specification meets the requirements of physical law, does she doubt whether the bridge will stand? No, because she understands the principles. She knows that if the calculations are correct and the materials are sound and the construction follows the design, the bridge must stand. This is not faith in the religious sense. This is knowledge based on understanding of law. The engineer might double-check her calculations to ensure accuracy, but she doesn't doubt the laws of physics themselves. She doesn't wonder if gravity might take a day off, or if steel might randomly decide not to bear the load it's designed to bear. This is precisely the mental state Troward wants you to achieve regarding manifestation. When you understand the law, when you see with perfect clarity that consciousness is the mold and the universal spirit is the substance that must fill that mold, you stop doubting whether it will work. Your only concern becomes whether you are holding the mold correctly and consistently, just as the engineer's only concern is whether her calculations are accurate. The law itself is never in question. The operation of the principle is never in question. Your application of the principle might require refinement, but the principle itself is as reliable as gravity, as certain as mathematics, as unchangeable as the relationship between cause and effect. Troward pointed out that we never doubt physical law because we see it operating constantly and consistently. You don't doubt that if you drop a stone it will fall, because you've seen stones fall thousands of times. The law of gravity has proven itself so thoroughly that doubt is impossible. But mental law operates in a realm less visible to the physical senses, and therefore people doubt it, even though it is operating just as constantly and just as consistently as physical law. Every thought you think sets causes in motion. Every pattern of consciousness creates corresponding patterns in your experience. This is happening all the time, whether you're aware of it or not. The law is always working. The only question is whether you are directing it consciously and constructively, or allowing it to operate unconsciously and haphazardly. When doubt arises, and it will arise, because your habitual consciousness has been conditioned by years of believing in randomness and limitation, Troward's logical framework gives you a way to address it. Doubt is not an enemy to be fought or suppressed. It is a misunderstanding to be corrected through clarity of thought. When you feel doubt creeping in, you don't need to force yourself to believe harder. You need to return to the principle. You need to remind yourself of the logical necessity that the universal mind must take the form of your habitual thought. You need to trace through the reasoning again. Consciousness is the mold. Universal substance is infinitely plastic. The substance must conform to the mold. Therefore, if I hold the mold steady, the substance must produce the corresponding form. This is not opinion. This is not hope. This is logical necessity. The more thoroughly you understand the why behind the what, the less room doubt has to operate. This is why Troward's teaching is so valuable, even though it's more abstract and philosophical than the practical instructions of Wattles or other teachers. The practical instructions tell you what to do, but if you don't understand why you're doing it, your practice will be mechanical and subject to doubt. When you understand the underlying principle, your practice becomes intelligent and doubt-resistant. You're not following instructions blindly, you're applying understood principles deliberately, and that understanding creates a foundation of certainty that doubt cannot easily shake. Think of it this way. If someone tells you to press a button and promises that pressing the button will make you wealthy, you might press the button, but you'll doubt whether it will actually work because you have no understanding of the mechanism connecting the button to the wealth. But if someone shows you that the button is connected to a complex but perfectly logical system, that pressing it triggers a sequence of inevitable causes and effects, each one following from the last according to natural law, then your doubt disappears. You might check to ensure the connections are all in place, but you don't doubt the system itself. Troward showed us the system. He revealed the connections between thought and form, between consciousness and experience, between the personal factor and the universal spirit. And in showing us the system, he removed the legitimate basis for doubt. This doesn't mean you'll never have doubts. The habit of doubting is deeply ingrained in human consciousness, reinforced by a culture that teaches randomness and helplessness. But what it means is that you now have a tool for addressing doubt when it arises. Instead of being overwhelmed by doubt, you can examine it. You can ask, is this doubt based on principle, or is it based on past conditioning? Is there any logical reason to doubt that the law will work, or am I simply afraid because I've been disappointed before? When you examine doubt in the light of Troward's logic, it usually dissolves because it has no logical foundation. It's fear disguised as skepticism, past failure projected into the future, cultural conditioning masquerading as wisdom. Moreover, understanding the logic of the law helps you distinguish between productive doubt and destructive doubt. Productive doubt says, I'm not sure I'm applying the principle correctly. Let me study it more carefully and refine my practice. Destructive doubt says, this probably won't work anyway. The universe doesn't care about me. I'm not worthy of success. Productive doubt drives you to deeper understanding and more precise application. Destructive doubt drives you to abandon the process before it can produce results. Troward's logical framework supports productive doubt while eliminating destructive doubt. It encourages you to examine your practice while simultaneously assuring you that the principle itself is sound. The removal of doubt has practical implications that extend far beyond manifestation practice. When you live with certainty that you are operating a lawful universe rather than surviving in a chaotic one, your entire approach to life changes. You stop being reactive and become proactive. You stop being a victim and become a creator. You stop hoping things will work out and start knowing that things must work out according to the patterns you establish in consciousness. This is not arrogance, it's understanding. And it's the understanding that Troward, more than any other teacher, made accessible to those willing to engage with his logical, rigorous, uncompromising examination of the laws governing the relationship between mind and reality. When you truly grasp the inevitability of the law's operation, doubt becomes as absurd as doubting whether water will flow downhill. And in that certainty, you find the power to create deliberately rather than accidentally, purposefully rather than haphazardly, successfully rather than randomly. Having established the logical foundation, we now turn to the specific principles through which the law operates, and the first of these is what Troward called the law of growth. This principle is crucial because it addresses a common mistake made by those who misunderstand the creative process: the attempt to force manifestation through mechanical effort rather than allowing it to unfold through organic growth. Troward observed that there are two fundamentally different modes of production in the universe: the mechanical and the organic. The mechanical mode is what you see in human manufacturing. Parts are assembled from outside, shaped by external force, put together according to a predetermined plan. A car is built mechanically. Workers don't plant a car seed and water it, but life operates differently. A seed contains within itself the entire pattern of the tree it will become, and given the right conditions, that pattern unfolds from within, not imposed from without. The distinction is profound when applied to manifestation. Most people, conditioned by the mechanical paradigm of industrial civilization, try to build their desires the way a factory builds a product. They make lists of all the steps required, all the resources needed, all the connections to be made, and then they try to force each step into place through willpower and effort. This approach exhausts them and often fails because it's working against the grain of how consciousness actually creates. Troward taught that manifestation follows the organic model, not the mechanical model. Your desire is not something you build, it's something you grow. And just as a gardener doesn't create the tree, but provides the conditions for the seed to express its inherent pattern, you don't create your desire through force, but provide the mental conditions for it to express its inherent potential. What does this mean practically? It means that when you form a clear mental image of your desire and hold it consistently in consciousness, you have planted a seed in the universal mind. That seed contains within itself the entire pattern of its own fulfillment, just as an acorn contains the entire pattern of an oak tree. Your job is not to figure out every step of how the acorn becomes the oak. The intelligence within the seed knows how to do that. Your job is to provide the right conditions, the mental equivalent of sunlight, water, and fertile soil. Those conditions are faith, gratitude, expectation, and the consistent holding of the mental image without contradiction through doubt. Given those conditions, the desire must grow into manifestation as surely as the acorn grows into the oak, because that is the nature of the law of growth. Troward emphasized that growth follows a specific sequence. The acorn doesn't become an oak tree overnight. First, there is the germination period when nothing visible is happening, but beneath the surface, the seed is absorbing energy and establishing its root system. Then there is the emergence of the shoot, small and vulnerable at first. Then there is the phase of steady growth where the tree adds height and girth year by year, and finally there is the mature tree, bearing fruit exactly as the pattern within the original seed dictated. Your desire follows the same sequence. When you first impress the desire upon the universal mind, there is a germination period when nothing visible happens. This is when most people give up, thinking the process has failed. But beneath the surface of visible reality, the mental causes you've set in motion are establishing their root system in the invisible substance, preparing for emergence. The key to working with the law of growth is patience combined with persistence. Not the patience of passivity, not sitting back and waiting for something to happen, but the patience of the gardener who, having planted the seed, continues to provide the right conditions while trusting the intelligence within the seed to handle the process of growth. You don't dig up the seed every day to check if it's growing. That would destroy the process. Similarly, you don't anxiously check every day for physical evidence of your desire manifesting. That anxiety and doubt interfere with the process. Instead, you maintain the mental image. You cultivate the feeling of the wish fulfilled. You give thanks for the harvest before it's visible. And you trust the law to produce the manifestation in its own time according to the natural sequence of growth. This organic approach resolves one of the great frustrations people experience with manifestation: the question of timing. When will my desire manifest? If you're thinking mechanically, you want to know the delivery date, like a customer tracking a package. But if you understand growth, you know that the question itself reveals a misunderstanding. The tree appears when the seed has completed its necessary stages of growth. The manifestation appears when the mental cause has ripened into physical effect through the natural sequence of development. You cannot rush this any more than you can rush a tree to maturity by pulling on its branches. What you can do is ensure that you're consistently providing the right conditions and not interfering with the process through doubt, fear, or contradictory thoughts. Troward also taught that the law of growth operates at the level of consciousness itself. Your desire manifests not by being imported from some external source, but by growing out of your own expanded consciousness. As you hold the mental image and cultivate the feeling of the wish fulfilled, your consciousness is actually growing, expanding, evolving to the point where it becomes the natural equivalent of your desire. This is why manifestation transforms you in the process. You don't stay the same person and get different circumstances. You become a different person, or more accurately, you become the fuller expression of who you were always capable of being, and the new circumstances are simply the natural environment for that new level of consciousness. Consider a person who desires wealth, but currently operates from poverty consciousness. The wealth cannot simply be dumped into the lap of poverty consciousness, because poverty consciousness would not know what to do with it and would quickly recreate poverty. This is the phenomenon of lottery winners going broke. The external circumstance changed, but the consciousness didn't grow. So wealth came and went, like planting a tree in toxic soil. It might take root temporarily, but it cannot thrive. True manifestation through the law of growth means that as you hold the mental image of wealth, your consciousness is gradually growing into wealth consciousness. You begin to think differently, see opportunities differently, make decisions differently. And as your consciousness grows, the external circumstances naturally align with it, not suddenly and miraculously, but organically and inevitably, as the outer always reflects the inner. This principle also explains why forced effort and strained striving are counterproductive. When you try to force manifestation, you're implicitly denying the law of growth. You're saying, the natural process isn't working, so I must make it happen through willpower. But the natural process is always working. The seed is always growing according to its nature. Your forceful interference doesn't speed up the process. It disrupts it. It's like a farmer who, anxious that his crops aren't growing fast enough, starts yanking on the shoots to pull them out of the ground faster. The result is not faster growth, but damaged plants. The same principle applies mentally. When you become anxious about manifestation and start trying to force it through manipulation, scheming, or desperate action, you damage the natural growth process that was already occurring beneath the surface. The proper attitude, Troward taught, is one of intelligent cooperation with the law. You provide the seed through your clearly formed desire. You provide the conditions through your consistent mental state. And then you trust the inherent intelligence of the law to produce the growth in its own way and time. This doesn't mean you become passive in your physical life. The tree sends out roots. You take inspired action. The tree turns toward the sun. You follow opportunities as they appear. But the action is not forced. It's organic, natural, an extension of the growth process itself. You act not from anxiety about making something happen, but from the joyful expression of the consciousness that is naturally expanding toward its desire. Understanding the law of growth also helps you recognize that so-called failure is often simply premature evaluation. The gardener who plants seeds and digs them up after a week, seeing no tree, concludes that the process failed. But the process didn't fail. The evaluation was premature. The germination period was not yet complete. Many people give up on their desires just before the breakthrough, just before the shoot was about to emerge from the soil, because they didn't understand that growth has phases and that the invisible phases are just as necessary as the visible ones. When you understand this, you develop the persistence to continue providing the right mental conditions even when physical evidence has not yet appeared, knowing with certainty that the law is working beneath the surface and the manifestation must emerge in due course. Finally, the law of growth reveals why gratitude and expectation are such powerful tools in manifestation. When you give thanks for your desire before it has physically manifested, you are not lying to yourself or engaging in positive thinking divorced from reality. You are acknowledging the seed. You are recognizing that the moment you impressed your desire upon the universal mind and began holding that pattern consistently, you set growth in motion. The harvest is already certain, even though it's not yet visible, just as the tree is already certain the moment a viable seed is planted in good soil. Your gratitude is not for something that might happen, it's for something that is happening, that must happen, that cannot fail to happen unless you interfere with the process. And your expectation is not hopeful wishing, it's intelligent recognition that growth is underway and emergence is inevitable. This is the power of the law of growth, and this is why Troward insisted that you stop trying to force success mechanically and start allowing it to unfold organically. The second pillar of Troward's teaching addresses what he called the liberty of the individual, and this principle is perhaps the most liberating and the most challenging to accept. The liberty of the individual means that you have absolute freedom to choose the seed, to determine what you will desire and impress upon the universal mind. The universe does not judge your choice. It does not decide whether your desire is worthy or unworthy, noble or selfish, aligned with divine will or contrary to it. The universal spirit is completely neutral regarding the content of your desire. It is concerned only with the fact that you have formed a desire and are holding it in consciousness, and its response is automatic. It must produce the manifestation corresponding to your mental pattern. This is the liberty that makes you sovereign over your own experience, and it's also the responsibility that many people find uncomfortable. This principle directly contradicts much religious and moral teaching that suggests certain desires are wrong, or that God punishes selfish desires and rewards only those who desire the right things. Troward, with his characteristic logical clarity, cuts through all of that. He points out that the universal mind operates as a law, not as a moral arbiter. Laws don't make moral judgments. The law of gravity doesn't check whether you're a good person before deciding whether to operate when you step off a cliff. It operates impersonally, universally, without exception. The law of mind operates the same way. Whatever mental seed you plant, it grows. Whatever consciousness you establish, it manifests. The law serves the saint and the sinner with equal faithfulness because the law is neutral. This neutrality is what Troward meant by the logic of law. Logic is neutral. 2 + 2 = 4 whether you're using that math to build a hospital or build a bomb. The principle of addition doesn't care, it simply operates. The principle of manifestation, that consciousness creates form, operates with the same neutrality. This is why Troward could speak of mathematical certainty. Once you understand the principle and apply it correctly, the result must follow, regardless of whether an external judge would approve of your desire. This doesn't mean that you should desire harmful things or that there are no consequences to your desires. It means that the manifestation mechanism itself doesn't prevent you from manifesting something just because it's unwise. The law gives you what you pattern in consciousness, and you must live with what you create. The liberty of the individual extends to the choice of what to focus on, what to believe about yourself, what to expect from life. You are not limited by what others believe is possible for you. You are not bound by the collective consciousness of limitation that surrounds you. You have the liberty to step out of consensus reality and create according to your own vision. This is a staggering degree of freedom, and it's what makes mastery of this law both possible and rare. It's possible because the law truly does give you the liberty to create anything you can hold consistently in consciousness. It's rare because most people never exercise that liberty. They accept the limitations imposed by culture, by authority figures, by past experience, and they never realize that those limitations are not inherent in the law, but are simply patterns they've unconsciously adopted. Troward emphasized that this liberty comes with a corresponding principle. You must leave the how to the law. This is where the logic becomes subtle, but crucial. You have complete liberty regarding what you desire and what you choose to impress upon the universal mind. But you do not have liberty regarding how that desire will manifest. The how is the department of the universal intelligence, which has access to infinite means, infinite resources, and infinite pathways that your limited human intellect could never conceive. When you try to specify the how, when you insist that your desire must manifest through a particular channel, by a particular method, involving particular people, you limit the law's ability to deliver your desire through the optimal pathway. Think of it as programming a GPS system. You have complete freedom to choose the destination. That's your liberty as an individual. But once you've entered the destination, you must trust the GPS to calculate the route. If you keep overriding the GPS, insisting on particular roads because you think you know better, you might never arrive, or you might take a much longer, more difficult route than necessary. The GPS has access to information you don't have: current traffic conditions, road closures, optimal timing. Similarly, the universal intelligence has access to information and possibilities you don't have, opportunities you haven't imagined, connections you don't yet know exist, pathways that don't currently appear open but will open at the precise moment needed. This is why worry about the how is so destructive to manifestation. Worry about how your desire will manifest reveals that you don't trust the law. It reveals that you think you must figure it out and make it happen through your limited human ability to manipulate circumstances. But the entire point of understanding this law is to recognize that you are tapping into an intelligence infinitely greater than your conscious mind, a creative power that knows how to manifest your desire in ways you could never orchestrate consciously. Your job is to hold the what, the clear mental image of the end result. The law's job is to handle the how, the means by which that end result comes into form. Troward used the example of a journey. If you decide to travel from London to Edinburgh, your decision to make that journey is your free choice. That's the liberty of the individual. But once you've decided, you don't create the roads, you don't build the vehicles, you don't construct the infrastructure that makes the journey possible. All of that already exists, and you simply utilize it. If you insist on creating your own roads and building your own vehicle from scratch, the journey becomes infinitely more difficult than it needs to be. Similarly, when you form a desire and impress it upon the universal mind, the infrastructure for manifesting that desire already exists in potential. The universal intelligence knows how to crystallize that potential into form. Your insistence on controlling the process is like insisting on building your own roads. It doesn't help. It hinders. This principle also explains why inspired action is different from desperate action. Inspired action comes from the universal intelligence, guiding you to take specific steps that align with the optimal pathway of manifestation. These actions feel natural, even easy, like being carried by a current rather than swimming against it. Desperate action comes from your ego, trying to force manifestation because you don't trust the law to deliver. These actions feel strained, exhausting, and they often lead nowhere because they're not aligned with the actual pathway the universal intelligence has prepared. When you leave the how to the law and simply remain open to inspiration, you find yourself taking actions that seem small or even random, but turn out to be exactly the right actions at exactly the right time. The liberty of the individual also means that you are not responsible for other people's manifestations. This is a crucial point that resolves much guilt and confusion. Some people worry that if they manifest wealth, they're taking it from others, or that if they manifest their desire, someone else must lose. But this thinking assumes a fixed pie, a limited amount of good to be divided among competing individuals. Troward explained that the universal spirit is infinite. There is no limitation in the creative substance itself. When you manifest wealth, you are not taking wealth from a limited supply. You are calling forth new wealth from infinite supply. Your manifestation doesn't prevent anyone else from manifesting their desires. Each individual has the same liberty you have, the same access to the law, and the same infinite supply available to them. This understanding removes the false humility that sometimes prevents people from manifesting abundance. They think it's more spiritual or more selfless to remain poor, as if their poverty helps others. But your poverty helps no one. It simply adds another pattern of limitation to the collective consciousness. When you manifest abundance through conscious use of the law, you become an example that inspires others. You create opportunities for others to benefit from your abundance, and you demonstrate the truth of the principle in a way that mere words never could. The most generous thing you can do is to master the law yourself, and then teach others to do the same, not by remaining stuck in limitation out of a misguided sense of humility. Finally, this principle reveals why you cannot manifest for another person without their cooperation. The liberty of the individual means that each person has sovereignty over their own consciousness. You cannot override someone else's mental patterns and force them to experience something different. If you try to manifest wealth for someone who is deeply embedded in poverty consciousness, your efforts will fail, because their consciousness is the mold through which the universal spirit flows in their experience, and that mold is shaped for poverty. The only way to help someone else is to help them understand the law so they can reshape their own consciousness. This is teaching rather than doing for them. It's more challenging but infinitely more valuable because it gives them the power to create for themselves rather than making them dependent on you. The liberty of the individual, then, is both a gift and a responsibility. It's a gift because it means you are truly free to create your experience according to your own vision. It's a responsibility because you cannot blame anyone else for your circumstances. They are the result of the patterns you have been holding in consciousness, consciously or unconsciously. When you fully accept both the gift and the responsibility, you step into your power as a conscious creator. You stop asking permission from the universe or from society or from authority figures. You stop waiting for circumstances to change before you can be happy. You recognize that you have the liberty to choose right now what pattern to hold, what seed to plant, what mental equivalent to establish. And you trust the law, the neutral, impersonal, absolutely reliable law, to produce the corresponding manifestation, not as a favor, but as a mathematical necessity. We now arrive at what Troward considered the supreme affirmation, the statement that aligns your individual consciousness with the universal spirit in the most direct and powerful way possible. This affirmation is simply, I am. These two words, which appear so simple as to be almost trivial, contain within them the entire key to conscious creation when understood at the depth Troward intended. The I am is not merely a grammatical construction. It is the fundamental statement of existence, of consciousness, of creative power. When you say I am, you are not describing something, you are activating something. You are claiming your identity with the universal creative power itself, and in that claim lies the authority to shape your reality. Troward taught that the I am is the point where the universal and the individual meet. The universal spirit exists as pure I am, undifferentiated being, consciousness without specific form or limitation. When that universal I am localizes itself as an individual, it becomes I am this or I am that. Consciousness taking on specific attributes, specific identity, specific form, but the core remains the I am, and that core is your direct connection to the infinite. When you say I am wealthy, you're not making a statement about your bank account. You're making a statement about your identity, and in declaring that identity, you are commanding the universal spirit, which flows through you as the individualized I am, to take the form of wealth in your experience. This is why the specific words that follow I am are so crucial. Every time you say I am poor, I am sick, I am limited, I am unworthy, you are using the creative power of the I am to pattern your consciousness for poverty, sickness, limitation, and unworthiness. You are commanding the universal spirit to express itself through you in those forms. The law doesn't judge whether these are good or bad statements, it simply responds to them as instructions. When you understand this, you become exquisitely careful about what you attach to "I am." You realize that these two words are the prefix to every creative command you give to the universe through your consciousness. Troward explained that most people use the "I am" unconsciously and destructively. They inherit identity statements from their culture, their family, their early experiences, and they repeat these statements habitlessly. I am not good with money. I am not smart enough. I am unlucky. I am not attractive. Each repetition strengthens the pattern, and the universal spirit, flowing through the individual consciousness, must create experiences that correspond to these self-definitions. This is not punishment. This is simply the law operating as it always operates. The tragedy is that most people never realize they are creating their limitations through the misuse of the "I am." They think these statements are observations about reality, when in fact they are commands creating reality. The path to mastery, then, begins with taking conscious control of what you attach to "I am." This is not mere positive thinking or affirmation in the superficial sense. It is recognition that you are wielding creative power with every self-definition you make, and therefore you must define yourself in alignment with what you desire to experience, not in alignment with what you have experienced in the past. When you say "I am abundant," you are not lying to yourself about your current bank balance. You are claiming an identity at the level of consciousness, knowing that consciousness precedes and creates form, and therefore the identity you claim must eventually manifest as corresponding circumstances. This practice requires you to stand in the position Troward called the unity with Source. You are not separate from the universal creative power. You are its localized expression. When you say "I am," you are speaking from the same creative authority that brought worlds into existence. This sounds blasphemous to the religious mind conditioned to believe that humans are small and powerless before an external God. But Troward insisted that true religion recognizes the divine within, not separate from the individual. You are not God in the sense of being the totality of the universal spirit. That would be absurd, like a wave claiming to be the entire ocean. But you are God in expression, a point through which the infinite expresses in finite form, and at that point of expression, you have creative authority. The "I am" practice becomes most powerful when combined with emotional conviction and repetition. Troward taught that thought impresses itself upon the universal mind in proportion to the feeling with which it is held. A thought repeated mechanically, without feeling, is like a seed planted on concrete. It makes no impression. But a thought charged with emotion, with the feeling of its reality, with conviction and certainty, impresses itself deeply into the universal mind and begins the process of manifestation immediately. When you say "I am abundant" with the feeling of abundance, when you allow yourself to feel what it would be like to already be abundant, to already possess what you desire, you are not imagining, you are creating. You are establishing the mental equivalent that must attract the physical equivalent. This brings us to one of the most subtle points in Troward's teaching, the difference between affirming from lack and affirming from fullness. When you say, "I am wealthy," while feeling poor, you create internal contradiction. Your words say one thing, your feeling says another. The law responds to the feeling, not the words, because feeling indicates the actual pattern of consciousness. So affirmations made from a state of lack often reinforce the lack rather than transcending it. The key is to shift into the state of consciousness where you feel wealthy before you make the affirmation. You imagine what it would feel like to already have what you desire. You live in that feeling, and from within that feeling, the affirmation "I am wealthy" becomes not a hopeful statement about the future, but a present recognition of your current identity at the level of consciousness. Troward gave specific guidance on how to cultivate this feeling state. He suggested that you enter into contemplation, quieting the mind and moving beyond the constant chatter of surface thoughts. In that quieted state, you affirm your unity with the universal spirit. You recognize that the same intelligence that grows trees from seeds and orchestrates the movements of planets is flowing through you right now. You are not separate from it. You are it in localized form. From this recognition of unity, you then claim your specific desire as already fulfilled at the level of consciousness. You don't beg or petition, you claim and declare. You stand in your authority as the individualized expression of infinite power, and you say "I am" followed by whatever corresponds to your desire, knowing that the universal spirit must arrange your experience to correspond to this self-definition. This practice transforms your relationship with desire itself. You stop wanting from a place of lack and start claiming from a place of authority. Want implies absence. I want wealth means I don't have wealth. But claim implies inherent right. I am wealthy means wealth is my natural state, my identity, my reality at the causal level, even if it hasn't yet manifested physically. This shift from wanting to claiming, from hoping to declaring, from begging to commanding, this is the shift from amateur to master, and it's made possible by understanding the creative power inherent in the I am. The practice is simple, but demands consistency. Every day, ideally multiple times per day, you take time to consciously align with the universal spirit, to feel your unity with it, and to declare your identity using the I am formulation. You say "I am" followed by whatever quality or condition you desire to manifest. I am abundant. I am healthy. I am successful. I am loved. Whatever corresponds to your desire. But you don't just say the words, you feel them. You let yourself experience what it would be like if these statements were already completely true at every level of your being. You live in that feeling as long as you can sustain it, and then you release it, trusting the law to bring it into form. Between these formal practice sessions, you monitor your unconscious use of I am throughout the day. When you catch yourself saying or thinking, "I am tired, I am stressed, I am broke," you interrupt that pattern. You recognize that you're using your creative power to reinforce conditions you don't want, and you consciously redirect, "I am energized, I am peaceful, I am prosperous." At first, this will feel forced, even false. Your current experience seems to contradict these statements. But remember, you're not describing your current experience, you're commanding your future experience. You're establishing the pattern at the causal level, knowing that effect must follow cause, that form must follow consciousness, that your experience must eventually conform to your self-definition if you hold it consistently. Troward warned against half-hearted practice of this principle. The I am used carelessly or inconsistently produces no results, just as a seed planted and then dug up repeatedly never grows into a plant. You must choose what you're going to identify with and then hold that identity with persistence and conviction. This is where most people fail, not because the principle doesn't work, but because they don't work the principle with sufficient consistency and emotional commitment. They affirm abundance one moment and then spend the next hour worrying about bills, thus contradicting their affirmation and cancelling its effect. The master, by contrast, claims the identity and then guards that identity vigilantly, refusing to allow contradictory thoughts or feelings to take root. Finally, the I am practice must extend beyond mere verbal affirmation to how you actually show up in the world. If you claim "I am abundant," but continue to act from poverty consciousness, hoarding, being stingy, constantly worrying about money, your actions contradict your words, and the contradiction prevents manifestation. True use of the I am means beginning to act as if the identity you've claimed is already fully real. You spend with the consciousness of abundance within reasonable limits. This is not encouragement to be financially irresponsible. You give generously. You make decisions from abundance rather than from lack. Your actions become consistent with your claimed identity, and this consistency accelerates the manifestation because now all levels of your being, thought, feeling, and action are aligned with the pattern you're establishing. The I am is the supreme affirmation because it is the most direct statement of your creative authority. It is you, the individual expression of universal spirit, declaring what form that spirit will take as it expresses through you. When you truly grasp this, when you feel the power of these two words and use them with consciousness and conviction, you stop being a passive recipient of life and become an active creator of life. You step into the role you were always meant to play, the role of conscious, deliberate, masterful director of infinite creative power into specific desired forms. This is not arrogance. This is your birthright as an individualized center of universal consciousness. And this is the key to the mathematical certainty of your success that Troward promised. When you consciously claim your identity in alignment with your desire, the law must produce corresponding experience, not because you're special or favored, but because that is simply how the law works. The final aspect of utilizing the law that Troward emphasized is perhaps the most difficult for the action-oriented mind to accept. You must leave the how to the universal intelligence. This principle completes the logic of manifestation and reveals why so much striving and forcing is not only unnecessary, but actively counterproductive. When you truly understand the relationship between the personal factor and the universal spirit, you realize that trying to control the details of how your desire manifests is like trying to control how a seed becomes a tree. The intelligence that knows how to transform an acorn into an oak tree with thousands of leaves, each perfectly formed, without a single conscious thought from you, that same intelligence knows how to transform your mental seed into physical manifestation with all the details perfectly arranged. In mathematics, you don't worry about whether the numbers will add up correctly. When you calculate 2,847 plus 6,193, you don't anxiously wonder if the answer will be correct. You follow the principle of addition, and the correct answer emerges inevitably. You might double-check your calculations to ensure you applied the principle correctly, but you don't doubt the principle itself. Troward wanted you to approach manifestation with the same certainty. Once you have formed your desire clearly, once you have impressed it upon the universal mind, once you have claimed it as your identity through the I am, the work is done at the causal level. The manifestation must follow, and it will follow through pathways and by means that the universal intelligence will arrange. Your job is not to figure out those pathways. Your job is to remain in the consciousness of the wish fulfilled and follow any inspired guidance that arises. The anxiety about how comes from misunderstanding your role in the process. You are not the creator of circumstances, you are the director of consciousness. The universal intelligence is the creator of circumstances. When you try to do both jobs, you interfere with the one who actually knows how to orchestrate the infinite details of physical manifestation. It's like a board member of a corporation trying to do the CEO's job. Not only does he fail at the CEO's job, but he also neglects his own proper role, and the whole organization suffers. Your proper role is maintaining the consciousness, the mental equivalent, the feeling of the wish fulfilled. The universal intelligence's role is arranging circumstances, moving people, opening pathways, and bringing your desire into form. When you stay in your lane and let the universal intelligence stay in its lane, manifestation flows smoothly. Troward used the example of travel again to illustrate this point. Suppose you decide to travel from your home to a distant city. You've made the decision. That's your role, the what. But do you create the roads between here and there? Do you build the vehicle? Do you personally arrange every detail of the journey? Of course not. The infrastructure already exists, created by intelligences and efforts you had nothing to do with. You simply utilize that infrastructure. You might choose between available routes, but you don't create the routes themselves. In manifestation, the infrastructure for bringing your desire into form already exists in the infinite intelligence of the universal mind. Your job is to claim your destination, to be absolutely clear about where you want to go, and then to trust that you will be guided along the optimal route. This trust is not blind faith, it's logical recognition of the nature of intelligence. The universal intelligence has access to information you don't have. It can see the entire web of cause and effect, past, present, and potential future. It knows which people need to meet, which opportunities need to align, which doors need to open, and when. Your conscious human mind cannot possibly track all these variables. When you try to figure out exactly how your desire will manifest, and then insist on that specific path, you limit the universal intelligence to working through your narrow conception of what's possible. But when you release the how, you allow the universal intelligence to work through the optimal path, which might be completely different from anything you could have imagined. This doesn't mean you become passive. Many people misunderstand leaving it to the universe as meaning do nothing and wait for things to happen. That's not what Troward taught. He taught that you should take action, but only inspired action. Inspired action is different from desperate action. Desperate action comes from anxiety, from fear that unless you force something to happen, it won't happen. This kind of action is exhausting and usually fruitless. Inspired action comes from intuition, from the gentle prompting of the universal intelligence guiding you to take specific steps that align with the path of manifestation. This kind of action feels easy, natural, even joyful, because it's flowing with the current of the law rather than swimming against it. How do you distinguish between inspired action and desperate action? Inspired action often comes as a quiet knowing, a sense that you should call a certain person, attend a certain event, explore a certain opportunity, even if you can't logically explain why. It doesn't feel forced. It feels like following a natural inclination. Desperate action comes with anxiety and strain. It's driven by the thought, I have to make this happen or it won't happen. It involves manipulating people, forcing doors that aren't opening, pushing against resistance. When you find yourself straining and struggling, that's a signal that you've left the position of trust and fallen back into the position of trying to do the universal intelligence's job for it. Troward advised that when you've impressed your desire upon the universal mind, you should then occupy yourself with present activities while remaining alert to inspiration. Don't sit around obsessing about when and how your desire will manifest. That obsession is a form of doubt. It suggests you don't really believe the law is working. Instead, live your life, fulfill your current responsibilities, engage in activities you enjoy, and simply remain open to guidance. When the universal intelligence needs you to take a specific action as part of the manifestation pathway, you will feel prompted to take that action. It might come as a thought, a feeling, a synchronicity, an opportunity that appears. When it comes, act on it without needing to understand the entire picture. This principle also explains why sometimes the manifestation comes through completely unexpected channels. You might be visualizing your ideal career opportunity and expecting it to come through a specific company or industry, but then the opportunity comes through a random conversation at a social event with someone you'd never have associated with that career. If you had been rigidly attached to the how, insisting the opportunity must come through your narrow expectation, you might have missed the actual opportunity when it appeared. By leaving the how to the universal intelligence, you remain flexible and alert to the actual pathway that unfolds, which is always the optimal pathway, even if you couldn't have predicted it. Worrying about the how is, in Troward's vivid analogy, like trying to push the hands of a clock forward to make time move faster. The clock has a mechanism that moves the hands at the proper speed. When you try to push them faster, you don't speed up time. You break the mechanism. The manifestation has a mechanism, the law of mind operating through the subjective nature of universal intelligence. When you try to force it faster through anxious manipulation, you don't speed up the manifestation, you interfere with the mechanism. The law needs your consistent consciousness, not your anxious interference. This brings us to the concept of timing. When will your desire manifest? The answer is when the consciousness that corresponds to it has fully established itself in your being. Remember the law of growth from earlier. The seed becomes the tree when the process of growth has completed its necessary stages. Your desire manifests when your consciousness has grown into the mental equivalent of that desire. You cannot rush this, but you also don't need to wait longer than necessary. The moment your consciousness fully embodies the reality of your desire, when you are no longer hoping or wishing, but simply knowing and being, the physical manifestation must appear. It cannot be delayed once the mental equivalent is complete. This explains the phenomenon that many experienced practitioners have noticed. When you finally let go of attachment to your desire, it often manifests immediately. This is not because the universe was waiting for you to stop caring. It's because holding on desperately to the desire was maintaining the consciousness of lack. I need this thing I don't have. When you let go, you often shift into the consciousness of already having what you need, and from that consciousness, manifestation is instant. The desperation was the very thing preventing the manifestation, because desperation is a statement of lack, and lack cannot produce abundance. Only the consciousness of abundance produces abundance. Troward's instruction then is beautifully simple. Know what you want. Claim it with the I am. Feel it as already accomplished in consciousness. Give thanks for it, and then let the universal intelligence handle the details of bringing it into form. Your continued work is simply maintaining the consciousness and following any inspired promptings to action. You don't need to figure out the entire pathway. You don't need to see the whole staircase before you take the first step. You only need to take the steps that are illuminated for you right now, trusting that as you take those steps, the next steps will be illuminated. This is how you cooperate with the law without interfering with it. The practical benefit of this approach is enormous. It removes anxiety from the manifestation process. When you believe you must figure out and control every detail of how your desire will manifest, you live in constant stress, constantly scanning for opportunities, constantly trying to force connections and manipulate circumstances. It's exhausting, and it usually doesn't work because you're working from a consciousness of struggle, which can only produce more struggle. When you understand that the how is not your responsibility, you relax. You maintain your vision, you hold your consciousness, you take inspired action, and you trust the intelligence that created galaxies to handle the logistics of your manifestation. The peace that comes from this understanding is itself a sign that you've shifted into the consciousness of knowing rather than hoping, and that consciousness is the very state from which manifestation flows most easily. We have traveled through the logical architecture of Thomas Troward's teaching, and now we must synthesize this understanding into a coherent whole that you can carry with you as you leave this teaching and enter the practice of living by law. The power of what you've learned lies not in the individual concepts but in how they interconnect to form a complete system of conscious creation. When you understand the personal factor as the mold that shapes universal spirit, when you grasp the law of growth as the organic unfolding of your desires, when you claim your identity through the I am, and when you release the how to universal intelligence, you possess a complete technology of mind that makes success mathematically certain rather than randomly hopeful. The synthesis begins with recognizing that all of these principles point to one central truth. Consciousness is cause and experience is effect. Everything you experience in the physical world is the outer manifestation of patterns held in consciousness, your consciousness individually and the collective consciousness of humanity. This is not metaphor or philosophy. This is the literal operating mechanism of reality as Troward extracted it through rigorous logical analysis. Before any physical thing exists, it exists as an idea, a pattern in consciousness. The chair you're sitting on existed as an idea in someone's mind before it existed as a physical object. The city you live in existed as a vision before it existed as concrete and steel. Your current circumstances existed as patterns in consciousness before they existed as your life experience. If consciousness is cause, then the way to change your life is not to manipulate circumstances directly, but to change the patterns of consciousness that are producing those circumstances. This is why affirmations, visualization, and mental practices are not just positive thinking or wishful fantasy. They are literal causes that must produce corresponding effects. When you change your consciousness from poverty to abundance, from limitation to possibility, from fear to faith, you are not just feeling better. You are altering the causal level of reality, and the effects must follow in the visible world. This is the logic of law that Troward demonstrated with the precision of a judge analyzing evidence. If cause A produces effect B, then when you change the cause to C, you must get effect D. There is no randomness, no uncertainty, no maybe in this equation. The synthesis continues by recognizing that you are not separate from the power that creates. This is perhaps the most radical implication of Troward's teaching and the one most resisted by conventional consciousness. We have been conditioned to see ourselves as small, powerless beings in a vast universe, hoping for favor from external forces. But Troward showed that this is a complete misunderstanding of the relationship between individual and universal. You are not a separate being hoping to influence an external God or universe. You are the universal spirit individualized, localized, expressing through the specific form of your consciousness. When you think, the universal spirit thinks through you. When you create, the universal spirit creates through you. You are not petitioning an external power. You are directing a power that flows through you as naturally as electricity flows through a transformer. This recognition transforms your relationship with desire itself. Desire is not a weakness or a distraction from spirituality. Desire is the universal spirit stirring within you, seeking new expressions, new forms, new experiences. When you feel desire for greater abundance, greater love, greater creativity, greater anything, that is not your small self being greedy. That is the infinite seeking to express more of its infiniteness through you. Your job is not to suppress desire, but to clarify it, claim it, and cooperate with the law to manifest it. Every desire that arises in you can be fulfilled, because the very fact that you can desire it means you have the capacity to manifest it. The seed of desire would not be planted in you if the soil of your consciousness could not grow it. Living by law brings a peace that living by hope or luck can never provide. When you hope for success, you are always anxious because you know hope is not certainty. You might succeed or you might not. When you live by law, you know that if you establish the cause correctly, the effect must follow. Your only concern becomes whether you are maintaining the consciousness, whether you are holding the pattern clearly, whether you are trusting the process without interference. These are things within your control, and therefore anxiety dissolves. You are no longer a gambler hoping for a lucky roll of the dice. You are an engineer applying known principles to produce predictable results. This does not mean that the path is always easy or that results appear instantly. Remember the law of growth. Organic processes have their own timing, and trying to force faster results only disrupts the process. There will be times when you hold the consciousness and see no visible results yet, and this is when doubt attempts to creep in. This is when you return to the logic. You remember that the seed in the ground shows no visible growth for a period, but the roots are establishing themselves beneath the surface. You remember that consciousness precedes form, and therefore your work at the level of consciousness is already producing results even if they're not yet visible. You trust the law the way you trust gravity, not because you can see it, but because you understand the principle and have seen it prove itself reliably. The synthesis also includes recognizing that this is a practice, not a one-time event. You don't master the law of mind by understanding it intellectually once. You master it through daily practice, through constant vigilance over your thoughts, through consistent cultivation of the consciousness that corresponds to your desires. Every day, you practice the I am affirmations. Every day, you visualize the wish fulfilled. Every day, you catch yourself when you slip into old patterns of limitation and consciously redirect your thoughts toward the new pattern you're establishing. This is not burden. This is the most empowering practice possible, because you are literally sculpting your future with every thought you think and every feeling you cultivate. Thomas Troward's message to you, transmitted across more than a century but as fresh and powerful today as when he first articulated it, is ultimately a message of profound empowerment. You are not a victim of circumstances. You are not at the mercy of forces beyond your control. You are not powerless before the challenges of life. You are a conscious, creative being with access to infinite intelligence and infinite power through the mechanism of your own consciousness. This is not motivational speaking or empty encouragement. This is logical necessity, based on the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the creative power of the universe. When you understand this deeply, when you feel it not just intellectually but viscerally, your entire approach to life transforms. The empowerment comes from understanding that the universe is not chaos but law. Law means reliability, predictability, certainty. The same laws that govern the movements of planets and the growth of trees govern the relationship between your thoughts and your experiences. You can learn these laws just as you can learn the laws of physics or chemistry. And once you understand them, you can work with them to produce the results you desire. This removes the randomness from life. Yes, there will always be elements you cannot control, other people's choices, natural events, the larger movements of society and economy, but your experience of those elements, your response to them, and your ability to navigate through them successfully, these are entirely within your control through the conscious direction of your mental and emotional states. Consider what it means to know, not believe, not hope, but know, that every sustained thought pattern must manifest as corresponding experience. It means that you hold in your mind right now the seeds of your future. The thoughts you think habitually today are creating the circumstances you will experience tomorrow, next month, next year. This is both sobering and exhilarating. Sobering because you must take responsibility for your circumstances as reflections of your consciousness. Exhilarating because you can change those circumstances by changing your consciousness, and you can begin that change right now, in this moment, with the very next thought you choose to think. Troward's logic also provides a framework for understanding why some people manifest easily and others struggle despite learning the same techniques. The difference is not that the law works for some and not for others. The law works for everyone, always, without exception. The difference is in the depth and consistency of consciousness change. Those who manifest easily have successfully shifted their habitual consciousness to align with their desires. Those who struggle are trying to use techniques on the surface, while their deep consciousness remains patterned for limitation. The solution is not better techniques, but deeper transformation of consciousness, and that transformation comes from understanding the logic, not just applying the methods. You are being given a key that unlocks doors most people never even notice exist. The key is understanding. When you understand that you are not separate from creative power, but are its vehicle of expression, when you understand that consciousness creates form through immutable law, when you understand that your thoughts are causes and your circumstances are effects, you possess knowledge that makes success inevitable, provided you apply it consistently. This is not secret knowledge in the sense of being hidden or occult. Troward published his lectures openly. The knowledge has been available for more than a century, but it is secret in the sense that most people never encounter it, and of those who do, few take the time to truly understand and apply it. The empowerment extends to every area of life, because consciousness is the foundation of all experience. You can apply these principles to manifest wealth, health, relationships, creative expression, spiritual growth, or any other desire. The mechanism is the same. Establish the mental equivalent. Claim it as your identity. Feel it as already accomplished. Maintain that consciousness consistently, and trust the law to produce the corresponding manifestation. Whether you're seeking financial abundance or physical healing or fulfilling relationships, you are working with the same principle. Consciousness shapes experience through the responsive nature of universal spirit. Troward would want you to understand that this teaching is not about becoming someone different from who you are. It's about becoming more fully who you already are. You already are an individualized expression of infinite intelligence and infinite power. That's not something you need to achieve. It's what you are by nature. The work is not to become powerful, but to recognize the power you already possess and have always possessed, but have been using unconsciously. Most people use their creative power to recreate limitation because that's what they've been conditioned to expect. When you awaken to conscious use of this power, you simply direct it toward what you actually want, rather than what you fear or have been told to expect. This realization also dissolves the need for comparison or competition. When you understand that you're working with infinite supply through the mechanism of your own consciousness, you recognize that someone else's success doesn't threaten yours. There is no limited pie to be divided. The universal spirit is infinite, and each person can manifest abundance without diminishing what's available to others. In fact, when you manifest successfully, you make it easier for others because you demonstrate the reality of the principle. You become living proof that the law works, and that proof is more convincing than any amount of theoretical teaching. The message is also one of liberation from past limitations. It doesn't matter what you have experienced in the past, what failures you've endured, what limitations you've lived under. The past has no power over you, except the power you give it by continuing to hold it in consciousness. The moment you establish a new pattern in consciousness, the law begins working to manifest that new pattern. You are not bound by personal history or family history or cultural history. Those histories explain how your consciousness came to be shaped as it is, but they do not determine what shape your consciousness must take going forward. You have in every moment the power to choose a new pattern, and that new pattern will produce a new experience. Troward's teaching ultimately points to a life lived in partnership with infinite intelligence rather than in struggle against imagined limitations. When you align your individual consciousness with universal spirit through understanding and application of the law, life becomes a flow rather than a fight. Opportunities appear at the right time. Resources come through unexpected channels. Challenges that once seemed insurmountable resolve with surprising ease. This is not magic. This is simply what happens when you work with the grain of reality rather than against it. You are no longer trying to force your will upon a resistant universe. You are recognizing that your true will and the universal will are one, and from that recognition, manifestation flows naturally. The equation is set before you. On one side, your consciousness, your thoughts, your habitual mental patterns, your claimed identity, your feelings and expectations. On the other side, your life experience, your circumstances, your opportunities, your relationships, your abundance or lack. The equals sign between them is the law of mind, operating with the same reliability and impersonality as mathematical law. Change what's on one side of the equation, and the other side must change correspondingly. This is not philosophy or theory. This is the operating principle of your existence, functioning every moment of every day, whether you recognize it or not. The variables are in your hands. You choose what thoughts to think, what patterns to establish, what identity to claim through the I am. The universe, the universal spirit, the infinite intelligence, the creative power, does not choose these variables for you. It simply responds to whatever variables you establish, producing corresponding results with mathematical certainty. For perhaps your entire life, until this moment, you have been setting these variables unconsciously, influenced by conditioning, culture, past experience, other people's opinions. The results you've experienced have been determined by those unconsciously set variables, but now you know. Now you understand the equation. And understanding the equation gives you the power to solve for any result you desire. Are you ready to trust the math? This is not a question of whether you feel confident or whether you've had success in the past or whether your current circumstances look promising. This is a question of whether you understand the principle and are willing to apply it with consistency and conviction. The mathematician doesn't need to feel confident before working a problem. She simply needs to understand the principles and apply them correctly. You have been given the principles. Troward has shown you the logic, demonstrated the mechanism, and explained the operations. The principles are sound. They have been tested by thousands of practitioners over more than a century. The only remaining question is whether you will apply them. Trusting the math means accepting that when you establish the cause correctly, the effect must follow. It means letting go of doubt, not by forcing yourself to believe against evidence, but by understanding that the evidence is always lagging behind consciousness. Current circumstances reflect past consciousness. When you change consciousness now, circumstances must change to reflect that new consciousness. But there is a time lag while the law of growth operates, while the manifestation moves from invisible to visible, from potential to actual. Trusting the math means maintaining your new consciousness pattern during that time lag, not reverting to old patterns just because the new results haven't appeared yet. The challenge I extend to you is this. Choose one desire, one clear, specific outcome you want to manifest in your life. It might be financial abundance, a career opportunity, a relationship, improved health, creative expression, or any other goal that matters to you. Take that desire and apply everything you've learned in this teaching. Form a clear mental image of the desire fulfilled. Claim it as your identity through I am affirmations charged with feeling. Establish the consciousness of already having what you desire. Give thanks for it as though it were already manifest. And then maintain that consciousness with absolute consistency for the next 30 days, regardless of what your physical senses tell you about current reality. During those 30 days, Monitor your thoughts vigilantly. Every time you catch yourself thinking in the old pattern, in limitation, in doubt, in fear, immediately redirect to the new pattern. This is not suppression of negative thoughts. It's conscious choice of the pattern you're establishing. You are rewriting the equation, variable by variable, thought by thought. Every time you choose a thought aligned with your desire rather than a thought aligned with your current limitation, you are strengthening the new pattern and weakening the old. This is the work of conscious creation, and it requires discipline, but it's discipline in service of liberation, not discipline as burden. Also, during these 30 days, act as though the new reality were already true to the extent possible and practical. This doesn't mean behaving recklessly or irresponsibly. It means that in your bearing, your decisions, your interactions, you come from the consciousness of the fulfilled desire rather than the consciousness of lack. If you're manifesting abundance, you act with the generosity of abundance rather than the stinginess of poverty. If you're manifesting confidence, you speak and carry yourself with confidence rather than with apologetic uncertainty. Your actions must align with your claimed consciousness, or you create contradiction that delays manifestation. Watch what happens. As you maintain this practice with consistency, you will begin to notice changes. Some will be internal. You'll feel differently, think differently, approach situations differently. Some will be external. Opportunities will appear, people will show up, circumstances will shift in unexpected ways. These are not coincidences. These are the natural results of the law responding to your changed consciousness. As you notice these changes, they will strengthen your faith. Not blind faith, but faith rooted in observation of the law's operation. And that strengthened faith will make it easier to maintain the consciousness, creating a virtuous cycle that accelerates manifestation. If you truly understand what Troward has taught, if you truly grasp that you are living in a lawful universe where consciousness creates form through predictable, reliable principles, then you must apply this understanding. To understand it and not apply it would be like understanding that you can multiply numbers to reach larger sums, but refusing to use multiplication when you need to solve a problem. The knowledge is useless if not applied. But when applied, this knowledge is the most practical, powerful tool you could possibly possess for creating the life you desire. Let the calculation begin. Write in the comments below, "I trust the law." This is not a superstitious ritual. This is your public declaration of commitment to apply what you've learned. It's your statement that you understand the logic, accept the responsibility, and choose to work with the law rather than against it. When you make this declaration, you set intention. And intention held with clarity and conviction is the first step in manifestation. So declare it, commit to it, and then live it for the next 30 days with unwavering consistency. The courtroom metaphor from the beginning of this teaching returns now with full significance. You stand before the judge who is the universal law. This judge has heard your case, the case you've been making through your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. Whether consciously or unconsciously, the judge will deliver a verdict, and that verdict must match the case you presented. If you've presented evidence of limitation, the verdict must be limitation. If you've presented evidence of abundance, the verdict must be abundance. The judge has no bias, no preference, no agenda. The judge simply applies the law to the evidence presented. You are both the attorney presenting the case and the party affected by the verdict. So present your case carefully. Present the evidence of the consciousness that matches what you desire, and the verdict in your favor is guaranteed. Not because you deserve it more than anyone else, not because you're special or chosen, but because that is simply how the law works. That is the mathematical certainty of your success. Now go forth and trust the calculation.